Wasp Theology. It hangs like a birthday, like a paper balloon, a piñata of stings. We fear its precarious detonation, its 1,000 alkaline pins, wary for my father, whose shocked heart shut when he was stung as a boy, whose throat was slit and a breathing tube forced down his swollen windpipe, and so, thank God, survived. Someone else will come to cut it down. For now, my father opens the shed door with unusual deference, as if drawing back the curtains on a tabernacle to show this holy monstrance, this avant-garde chandelier, all the honeycombed cells in its electric hotel of spitballed papier-mâché are a tender, ready nursery for the body of their Christ. And all these black and yellow flames are 1,000 simmering tongues, solicitous beings, manifesting brood, substantiating summer light.
Hello, my name is Jane Benson and I'm Fiona's mother.
Right, tell us all about the wasps' nests then.
When we lived in Denmark, the car was kept in a carport, and through that was a small hut where we kept some wood.
My parents talk a lot about Denmark because we lived in Denmark when this happened, so my dad was in the forces and they moved around a lot.
One summer's day we were aware that there were quite a lot of wasps around, and when we looked in the wood store, there were 3 wasp nests, we call them bikes in Scotland, on the ceiling of the shed. One was very large, about the size of a melon, and there were other 2 smaller ones alongside, which were about the size of teacups. The danger was that we had 2 young children, Fiona and her little sister, and we also had a dog. But our main concern really was the 2 children and David, who'd been stung by a wasp when he was a child, which had some consequences for him.
When I was a child, probably about 4 years of age, we were playing in the garden, and I was probably playing with my brother at the time because he was always getting me into trouble. But I was probably also eating a piece of fruit, and I was actually stung by a wasp, which was obviously attracted by the fruit. And it stung me in the throat, and it's not quite sure whether it stung me on the outside of the throat or whether it actually entered my mouth with the fruit I was eating and then stung my throat from the inside. But the effect of that was my throat swelled very rapidly, and they had to call in the doctor, who did an emergency tracheotomy on the spot and whipped me off to hospital. But obviously my recollection as a 4-year-old is not really very clear. And so I can only really go on the stories my brother told me, and to a lesser degree the stories my mother told me, because she didn't really talk about that very much. She didn't like to talk about the difficult things that had happened, and so it is a vague recollection that something very nasty did happen. And I do have a scar on my throat, on the front of my throat, from which is clearly a tracheotomy scar.
So in the meantime, of course, we did look at it. I used it as a sort of little teaching point for the children so they could see how beautifully it was made, although it had dangerous things inside it. So I explained how the wasps used wood to mash up and make into paper, and then they used this papery grey colour, putty colour stuff to make this very lovely nest for the queen to lay her eggs in.
That's one of my very early memories, is of these wasps' nests and of, having to be careful for Dad and Mum showing us. And it was funny that she said, Oh, I used it as a little teaching point because my mum was a primary school teacher all her life. She's a teacher through and through.
Just out of interest, so you've always been telling us about bugs and things.
Yes.
Where does that come from?
My mother, she was brought up on a farm, and so she was surrounded by animals and wildlife for some considerable time. So she passed her knowledge on to me and to my sister and brother. She wasn't so hot on trees, but she knew a lot about wildflowers and insects and wild animals because of the way that she had been brought up. And so I passed that on to the children that I teach or the children that I had. And when I went up to help a school from Windsor, these were city children from Windsor, with a week's stay in the Peak District. I was always at the end with a group of children because we just didn't march through the Peak District from one place to another. We actually looked at the things around. And by the time we would get to where they had stopped for a break, they'd finished our break and we hadn't had ours yet. But my little group saw a lot more of the living stuff there, the insects and the animals. And in fact, at one stage, they came running back to me and said, quick miss, there's a hedgehog swimming. And it was a water vole swimming, but it looked like a hedgehog because it had all its hair was sticking up. But that was in Dovedale, and I've never forgotten it.
My wife Jane talked about wasps in Viborg, and I mentioned there had been a bit of a traumatic incident with wasps when I was a child. Well, that opened up some discussion because it was taking me back to a time when I was about 3 years of age. Now, some 70 years later, I have a very little personal recollection of what happened. And apart from a scar on my neck, was very much reliant on historical snippets of conversation with family members as to what took place. And my mother had always been reluctant to talk about this sort of thing in any great detail. Fiona prompted me to speak to my elder brother, Malcolm, to try and sort out fact from family myth. Malcolm is 6 years older and would have been 9 years old at the time, and does still have a good recollection of what happened to the younger David. The story is simple. We were playing in the garden, and Malcolm went inside the house whilst I stayed outside to eat a piece of apple. The next thing they knew was that I was screaming and obviously in pain. And when they went out to me, I had an angry red mark on my throat. The apple was nowhere to be seen, and they were unsure as to whether or not I had been stung on the outside of the throat or on the inside of the throat. But within a very short space of time, my throat around the windpipe swelled very quickly and didn't then settle down, and a large, hard, angry lump grew from the centre of the swelling. There was concern about my breathing in between bursts of crying. My parents called out our family GP, Dr. Ferguson. In those days, it was not easy to whisk somebody off to accident and emergency, and GPs did rather more than they do now. Dr. Ferguson decided to open up the swelling to determine what was causing the problem, and this he did on the spot, cleaning out the site of the inflammation and swabbing out the poison and gathering infection. This left a considerable hole in my neck, which is witnessed by the scar I still carry. Over the years, I came to understand that Dr. Ferguson had carried out a tracheotomy, but this was not the case. He just dug a very big hole. I can't say that this incident has caused me too much concern over the years, but I've always treated wasps and also bees with a healthy respect. In the last many weeks, I've been working in our forest garden, and the wasps, hornets, black bees and bumblebees have given me lots of attention as I've tended the planting of wildflowers. It's fascinating to see how busy they are, and how perfectly and accurately the bumblebee fits into the flower bells of the foxgloves.
It's so weird reading the poem now and knowing that there wasn't a tracheotomy. It's really strange. It's funny how these things become kind of family legend, and my dad has just always thought that he had a tracheotomy, like on his it used to be on his passport, I'm sure, that they used to have a little category for distinguishing features on your passport, and I remember seeing his, and his saying under distinguishing features that he had this tracheotomy scar. Like, it's just been a fact of his life, and then it's very strange that isn't quite what happened. And it's it's just funny. I've always kind of been poking at that story, like trying to make sense of it. Like, did he swallow the wasp, or what happened, and why doesn't he remember it? And